If you were the family scapegoat, I want you to know something tonight. Carl Jung understood what happened to you. He understood it in a way that most people never will. And what he understood might finally help you see that what happened wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. You were chosen. Not because you were bad or wrong or broken. You were chosen because you were sensitive enough to feel what everyone else was refusing to feel. You were chosen because you could carry what they couldn't face in themselves. Jung called this projection. The family takes everything they cannot accept about themselves, everything they're ashamed of, everything they're afraid of, and they put it onto one person. They make that person carry it. And if you're listening to this tonight, that person was you. You were the one who got blamed when things went wrong. You were the one who was always too much or not enough. Too sensitive, too emotional, too difficult, not grateful enough, not good enough, never quite right. And the worst part, the part that Jung understood so deeply, is that you started to believe it. You started to believe there was something fundamentally wrong with you, because everyone was telling you there was. Your mother, your father, your siblings, they all seem to agree. So it must be true. But tonight, as you lie here in the darkness, I need you to hear this. They were wrong. They were projecting. And Jung spent his entire life helping people understand the difference between what actually belongs to them and what was placed on them by others. The scapegoat carries the family shadow. That's what Jung would say. The shadow is everything the family cannot acknowledge about itself. The anger, the shame, the fear, the inadequacy, all of it gets projected onto one person, and that person becomes the problem. If we can just fix them, the family thinks, everything will be okay. But it's a lie. And somewhere deep inside, you've always known it was a lie. You weren't the problem. You were the truth teller. You were the one who could feel what was really happening beneath the surface. You were the one who couldn't pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. And families that are built on denial need someone to blame for the cracks that start to show. So they chose you. Maybe because you were the most sensitive. Maybe because you asked questions. Maybe because you reminded them of something in themselves they hated. Maybe you were just in the wrong place, at the wrong time, and the role needed to be filled. Jung believed that every family has an unconscious, just like every person does. The family unconscious is made up of all the things the family refuses to see about itself. The addiction that no one talks about. The abuse that everyone pretends didn't happen. The rage that simmers beneath the pleasant surface. The grief that was never allowed. The shame that gets passed down through generations. And someone has to carry that unconscious material. Someone has to be the container for everything the family won't feel. That was you. You became the family's unconscious made flesh. When your mother was overwhelmed and couldn't admit it, she took it out on you. When your father felt like a failure and couldn't face it, he made you the failure. When your siblings felt unsafe and couldn't say it, they joined in making you the unsafe one, the problem, the reason things were hard. You absorbed all of it. You took it in. You carried it in your body, in your psyche, in the way you learned to see yourself. And it was so heavy. It's been so heavy for so long. But Jung would tell you this. What you've been carrying doesn't belong to you. It never did. And part of the work of healing, part of the work of individuation, as Jung called it, is learning to give it back. Not with anger necessarily, though anger is allowed. Not with confrontation necessarily, though sometimes that comes. But internally, psychologically, you give it back by seeing it for what it is. Projection. This is their shadow, not yours. This is their shame, not yours. This is their inability to face themselves, not your failure to be acceptable. And I know how hard this is to believe, because the role of scapegoat gets internalized so deeply. You've spent years, maybe decades, trying to figure out what's wrong with you, trying to fix yourself, trying to become someone they could finally accept, trying to prove you're not what they said you were. But you can't prove anything to people who need you to be the problem. Because if you're not the problem, then they have to look at themselves. And that's what they've been avoiding all along. Jung talked about something he called the inferior function. Every family, like every person, has parts of itself it considers inferior, unacceptable, shameful. And those parts get projected onto the scapegoat. You became the carrier of the family's inferior function. If the family valued strength, you were made weak. If the family valued success, you were made the failure. If the family valued conformity, you were made the rebellious one. If the family valued silence, you were made too loud. Whatever the family couldn't tolerate in itself, it made you embody. And here's what Jung understood that most people miss. The scapegoat is often the healthiest one in the family system. Because you're the one who's feeling the truth. You're the one who's responding to the dysfunction with appropriate distress. You're the one who couldn't pretend. The fact that you were in pain, the fact that you struggled, the fact that you couldn't just smile and go along, that wasn't pathology. That was sanity. You were having a sane response to an insane situation. But they made you think your response was the problem. They made you think your feelings were the problem. They made you think you were too sensitive, too reactive, too much. And you internalized that. You learned to be ashamed of your own emotional honesty. Jung would say you were the symptom bearer. You were expressing through your symptoms what the whole family was feeling but couldn't admit. Your anxiety was the family's anxiety. Your depression was the family's depression. Your anger was the family's unexpressed rage. You were speaking the emotional truth of the system, and they punished you for it. And I need you to understand something tonight. The punishment wasn't about you. It was about their need to keep the truth hidden. Because if they acknowledged what you were feeling, if they validated your reality, the whole family myth would collapse. The story they tell themselves about who they are would fall apart. So they had to make you wrong. They had to make you the problem. They had to maintain the scapegoat dynamic because it kept them from having to change. Jung spent years working with people who had been scapegoated. He understood the particular kind of psychological damage it creates. Because when everyone around you is telling you that you're the problem, you start to distrust your own perceptions. You start to doubt your own reality. You develop what Jung might call a wounded relationship to the self. The self, in Jung's psychology, is your true nature. It's who you actually are beneath all the projections and conditioning. It's your authentic being, and when you're the scapegoat, your access to the self gets blocked. Because you've been taught that who you really are is unacceptable. So you learn to hide. You learn to perform. You learn to try to become who they want you to be, even though it's impossible because they need you to be the problem. You twist yourself into shapes that aren't you. You abandon yourself trying to gain their acceptance. And it never works. Because the role of scapegoat isn't about you. It's about them. It's about what they need you to be so they don't have to face themselves. And this is where Jung's work becomes so important. He would tell you that healing begins when you start to differentiate, when you start to separate what's actually yours from what was projected onto you, when you start to reclaim your own reality. Differentiation doesn't mean you cut everyone off, though sometimes that becomes necessary. Differentiation means you develop a clear boundary between their perception of you and who you actually are. You stop trying to convince them. You stop trying to prove yourself. You stop participating in the dynamic. You see it for what it is, and you start to see yourself clearly, maybe for the first time. You're not what they said you were. You're not too sensitive. You're not too much. You're not fundamentally flawed. You're not the problem that needed to be fixed. You were a child, or a young person, or a family member who got assigned a role in an unconscious family drama. And you played that role because you didn't know you had a choice. But you have a choice now. You can choose to see it differently. You can choose to give the shadow back. You can choose to stop carrying what was never yours to carry. Jung believed that every scapegoat, if they do the work, can transform their wounding into wisdom, because you learned something the others didn't. You learned to see beneath the surface. You learned to feel what's real. You learned that the family story isn't always true. And those are profound gifts, even though they came at a terrible cost. You developed depth. You developed sensitivity. You developed the ability to see through pretense. You know what it feels like to be on the outside, so you have compassion for others who are marginalized. You know what it feels like to be misunderstood, so you're careful with your judgments. You know what it feels like to carry shame that isn't yours, so you're less likely to shame others. These are the gifts. Jung would call them the treasures that were hidden in the darkness. The scapegoat wound, when it's understood and integrated, becomes a source of profound psychological and spiritual depth. But first, you have to see it. You have to name it. You have to stop blaming yourself. And tonight, as you begin to let yourself rest, I want you to consider the possibility that you were never the problem, that you were actually the one telling the truth in a system built on lies, that your sensitivity wasn't weakness, it was strength, that your inability to pretend wasn't pathology, it was integrity. What if everything you've believed about yourself, all the ways you've thought you were broken or wrong or too much, what if all of that was just their projection? What if the real you, the self that Jung talked about, has been here all along, waiting for you to see through the fog of their judgment? What if you're not who they said you were? What if you never were? Jung would tell you that the journey back to the self requires you to question everything you were taught about yourself. It requires you to look at your family with clear eyes, which is one of the hardest things a person can do. Because we want to believe our families loved us well. We want to believe they saw us accurately. We want to believe they had our best interests at heart. And maybe in some ways they did. Maybe they loved you as much as they were capable of loving. But love doesn't mean they saw you clearly. Love doesn't mean they didn't project. Love doesn't mean you weren't scapegoated. Families are unconscious. Jung said this over and over. Families operate from patterns that have been passed down for generations. Your parents were probably carrying wounds from their own childhoods. Their parents were carrying wounds from before that. The scapegoat pattern gets repeated because no one stops to see it and break it. But you can break it, not for them, for yourself. You can see it, name it, understand it, and choose differently. You can choose to stop believing their version of who you are. You can choose to stop trying to earn their approval. You can choose to stop explaining yourself, defending yourself, trying to make them see. Because they can't see. Not because you're not worth seeing, but because they're looking through the lens of their own unresolved shadow. Jung talked about the process of becoming conscious as the most difficult and most important work a person can do. And for the scapegoat, becoming conscious means seeing the family dynamic clearly, without the fog of guilt or the desperate hope that if you just do it right, they'll finally love you the way you needed. They might never love you that way. They might never see you clearly. They might never acknowledge what happened. And that's devastating. It's a grief that needs to be felt. But it's also a doorway to freedom. Because when you stop needing them to validate your reality, you can start to validate it yourself. When you stop needing them to tell you you're okay, you can start to know it in yourself. When you stop trying to fix yourself for them, you can start to discover who you actually are. And who you actually are is not the scapegoat. That was a role that was forced on you, a role that you didn't choose, a role that you can now, with consciousness and effort, begin to shed. The real you is underneath all of that. The self is underneath all of that. And Jung believed the self is whole. It's not broken. It was never broken. It was just hidden beneath layers of projection and shame and internalized judgment. Your work now is excavation. It's clearing away what doesn't belong to you so you can finally see what does. It's learning to trust your own perceptions again. It's learning to believe your own experience. It's learning that you are allowed to have boundaries with people who harmed you, even if those people are family. Especially if those people are family. Jung understood something that many people struggle to accept. You don't owe your family your well-being. You don't owe them your peace. You don't owe them continued participation in a dynamic that diminishes you. You're allowed to protect yourself. You're allowed to distance yourself. You're allowed to choose relationships that honor who you actually are, instead of demanding you play a role that was never true. This doesn't make you ungrateful or selfish or bad. It makes you sane. It makes you an individuated adult who is choosing consciousness over unconscious repetition. And yes, it's lonely sometimes. The scapegoat who wakes up often finds themselves more alone than they were before. Because leaving the scapegoat role means leaving the family system in some way. Even if you're still in contact, it means you stop playing your part. And when you stop playing your part, the family often doesn't know what to do with you. They might reject you more. They might try to pull you back in. They might create a crisis to re-engage you in the old pattern. They might replace you with a new scapegoat. All of this is painful to witness. But Jung would remind you that individuation requires separation. It requires you to become yourself even when that self isn't what others want you to be. It requires you to choose your own psychological health over the comfort of the family system. And that's hard. It goes against everything you were taught. You were taught that family is everything. You were taught that you have to keep trying. You were taught that love means enduring, accepting, forgiving without boundaries. You were taught that your needs come last. But Jung would say those teachings are part of what kept you in the scapegoat role. Real love includes boundaries. Real family includes seeing each other clearly. Real healing includes acknowledging harm, not just pretending it didn't happen. You're allowed to want that. You're allowed to need that. And you're allowed to grieve when you don't get it. The grief is part of this. Jung understood that psychological growth always involves grief. You're grieving the family you needed and didn't have. You're grieving the childhood you should have had. You're grieving the version of your parents who could have seen you and protected you and loved you well. Those versions don't exist, and that's heartbreaking. But acknowledging that heartbreak is part of how you heal. Because you can't heal what you won't let yourself feel. So tonight, if grief is here, let it be here. If anger is here, let it be here. If you're tired of carrying what was never yours, let that exhaustion be here. You don't have to fix it or resolve it or make it mean something. You just have to let yourself feel it. Jung believed the psyche knows how to heal itself if we give it space. If we stop trying to control it or rush it or make it be something other than what it is. The feelings that come up aren't the problem. They're part of the solution. They're the psyche's way of processing what happened and moving toward wholeness. Your anger at your family isn't bad. It's appropriate. Your grief about what you didn't receive isn't weakness. It's honesty. Your desire to be free of the scapegoat role isn't selfish, it's healthy. You're allowed to feel all of it. And you're allowed to choose yourself, even when it means disappointing people who wanted you to keep carrying their shadow. Because here's what Jung knew. Your life is yours, not theirs. Your psyche is yours. Your path is yours. And no one, not even family, not even people you love, has the right to tell you who you have to be. You get to discover that for yourself. You get to peel back the layers of projection and shame and see who's actually there underneath. You get to meet yourself, the part of you that was never the scapegoat, the part that has always been whole. That self has been waiting for you. It's been here all along, beneath the noise of their voices, beneath the weight of their expectations, beneath the internalized belief that something is wrong with you. The self is patient. It will wait as long as it takes for you to remember. And remembering doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, in moments, in small recognitions, in times when you catch yourself believing their story about you and you pause and you question it, in times when you choose your own reality over their version, in times when you set a boundary and hold it even though it's uncomfortable. Each of those moments is a step toward the self. Each of those moments is you choosing consciousness over conditioning. Each of those moments is you breaking the scapegoat pattern. Jung called this the process of individuation. It's becoming who you actually are, instead of who you were trained to be. It's the most important work you'll ever do. And it's not easy, especially for the scapegoat. Because you have to do it against the tide of an entire family system that wants you to stay in your role. But you can do it. You are doing it. The fact that you're listening to this, the fact that you're questioning, the fact that you're seeking understanding, all of that is evidence that you're already on the path. You're already waking up. You're already seeing through the projection. You're already beginning to reclaim yourself. And tonight, as you let yourself rest, I want you to know that Jung would be proud of you. He spent his life trying to help people see what you're beginning to see. He understood how much courage it takes to look at your family honestly. He understood how much it costs to choose yourself when you've been trained to choose everyone else. He also understood that it's worth it. That on the other side of this grief, and this work, and this differentiation, there's a version of you that's free, not perfect, not without pain, but free. Free to be who you actually are. Free to trust your own perceptions. Free to build relationships based on reality instead of projection. That freedom is possible. It's already beginning to emerge as you let go of what was never yours to carry. So rest tonight knowing that you're not the problem. You never were. You were the truth teller in a family that couldn't handle the truth. You were the sensitive one in a family that was afraid of feeling. You were the scapegoat, not because you deserved it, but because the family needed someone to carry their shadow, and you were available. But you're not available anymore. You're waking up. You're seeing clearly. And you're beginning to give it back. This is your life now. This is your psyche. This is your path. And no one gets to tell you who you have to be anymore. Not even family. Especially not family. Jung understood. And if you listen closely, beneath all the noise, you'll find that you understand too. You've always understood. You just needed permission to trust what you know. Consider this your permission. Trust yourself. Trust your experience. Trust that what you felt was real and what they told you was projection. You're not crazy. You're not too much. You're not fundamentally flawed. You're a person who was scapegoated by an unconscious family system. And now you're becoming conscious. Now you're choosing differently. Now you're finding your way home to the self that was always here, waiting for you to remember. Rest in that tonight. Let the weight of it soften. Let yourself begin to imagine what it might feel like to be free of the role you never chose. You're going to be okay. More than okay. You're going to discover who you actually are. And that person, the real you, is worth discovering. Jung believed it. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the doubt and shame, you believe it too. Let yourself rest now. Part of you has been carrying this for so long. You can put it down for tonight. You can let yourself just be here, without trying to fix anything, or prove anything, or become anything other than what you are. Just rest. Just breathe. Just be. You're exactly where you need to be. There's something Jung understood about scapegoating that most people never learn. He understood that the scapegoat is chosen for a reason, not a fair reason, not a reason that makes it right, but a reason nonetheless. You weren't randomly selected. There was something about you, something in you, that made you the perfect candidate to carry the family shadow. And understanding what that something was can help you understand why it happened and why it hurt so much. Often, the scapegoat is the most emotionally aware person in the family. You felt things others didn't feel, or wouldn't let themselves feel. You picked up on the undercurrents, the tensions, the unspoken truths that everyone else was working hard to ignore. And that awareness made you dangerous to the family system, because systems that rely on denial need everyone to participate in the denial. They need everyone to pretend. They need everyone to smile and act like everything is fine, and you couldn't do that. Maybe you tried, but something in you kept responding to the truth underneath the performance. Maybe you cried when you were supposed to be strong. Maybe you asked questions when you were supposed to be quiet. Maybe you felt angry when you were supposed to be grateful. Maybe you were sensitive to the moods in the room, to the things no one was saying, to the violence that was called discipline, or the neglect that was called independence. Whatever it was, you were attuned to reality in a way that threatened the family myth. And so the family had to discredit you. They had to make you the problem so your perceptions could be dismissed. Because if your perceptions were valid, then everything the family believed about itself would be called into question. Jung would say you were carrying the family's unlived truth, the truth they couldn't afford to acknowledge. The truth about the pain, the dysfunction, the ways they were failing each other and themselves. That truth had to go somewhere. It had to be expressed somehow. And it got expressed through you. Through your symptoms. Through your struggles. Through your supposed failures and flaws. You became the living manifestation of everything that was actually wrong with the family system, and they punished you for it. This is what Jung meant when he talked about the identified patient in a family. The identified patient is the person who gets labeled as sick or broken or problematic. But Jung understood that the identified patient is usually the healthiest one because they're the only one being honest about the fact that something is deeply wrong. Everyone else is in denial. Everyone else is pretending. Everyone else is maintaining the false self. The persona that Jung talked about so much, but the scapegoat can't maintain the persona as easily. The truth keeps breaking through, and the family can't tolerate that. So they isolate you. They other you. They make you feel like you're the only one who sees things this way, like you're the only one who's struggling, like everyone else is fine and you're the problem. And that isolation is part of what makes scapegoating so damaging. Because humans are wired for belonging. We need to feel like we're part of the group. We need to feel like we're seen and accepted and valued. And when your family makes you the outsider, when they make you the one who doesn't fit, it creates a wound that goes very deep. Jung called this the wound of not belonging. And he understood that for some people, especially sensitive people, this wound becomes the central organizing principle of their psyche. You spend your whole life trying to figure out how to belong, trying to make yourself acceptable, trying to contort yourself into a shape that will finally earn you the love and acceptance you needed as a child. But here's what Jung also understood. You can't earn it. Not from them. Because the scapegoat role isn't based on what you do or don't do. It's based on what the family needs you to be. And what they need you to be is the problem. So no matter how hard you try, no matter how much you change or improve or succeed, it's never enough. Because you're not actually trying to meet a real standard. You're trying to meet an impossible standard designed to keep you in your place. And this is where so much of your energy has gone, trying to prove you're good enough, trying to show them they were wrong about you, trying to become so successful or so kind or so perfect that they'll finally see you differently. But they won't. Or they can't. Because seeing you differently would require them to see themselves differently. It would require them to take back the projection. It would require them to own their shadow. And most families aren't capable of that level of consciousness. Jung spent decades working with people trying to help them understand this. You can't change other people's projections by changing yourself. You can only withdraw your participation in the dynamic. You can only stop believing their story about who you are. And that's so much harder than it sounds. Because their story has become your story. You've internalized the scapegoat identity. You've taken in the belief that something is fundamentally wrong with you. You've learned to see yourself through their eyes. Jung called this internalization. It's when external judgments become internal judgments. What they said about you becomes what you say about you. Their criticism becomes your inner critic. Their rejection becomes your self-rejection. And you carry them inside you, even when they're not in the room. This is one of the deepest wounds of scapegoating. It's not just that they hurt you. It's that you learn to hurt yourself in the same ways they hurt you. You learn to dismiss your feelings the way they dismissed them. You learn to judge yourself harshly the way they judged you. You learn to expect rejection because rejection is what you knew. And now, even when you're away from them, even when you're in relationships with people who are different, you still carry those patterns. You still expect to be the problem. You still wait for people to figure out there's something wrong with you. You still sabotage your own belonging, because belonging doesn't feel safe when you've been conditioned to expect rejection. This is what Jung would help you see. The scapegoat wound doesn't just live in your past. It lives in your present. It lives in the way you relate to yourself and others right now. And healing it requires more than just understanding what happened. It requires changing the relationship you have with yourself. You have to learn to stop scapegoating yourself. You have to learn to stop agreeing with their assessment of you. You have to learn to question the inner voices that sound like their voices, the ones that tell you you're too much or not enough or fundamentally flawed. Those voices feel like truth because they're so familiar, but they're not truth. They're the internalized family system. They're the projection that you took in and made your own, and you can choose not to believe them anymore. Jung would say this is part of the work of consciousness. Becoming aware of which thoughts are actually yours and which thoughts are hand-me-downs from your family. Which beliefs reflect your real experience and which beliefs are just what you were taught to believe about yourself. And as you start to sort through this, as you start to separate your truth from their projection, something begins to shift. You start to have moments where you catch yourself in the old pattern, where you hear yourself thinking something harsh about yourself, and you pause and you ask, is this actually true? Or is this just what I was taught? Those moments of pause, those moments of questioning, those are the moments when healing begins. Those are the moments when you start to reclaim your own mind from the family story that's been running it. It's slow work. It doesn't happen all at once. Because the scapegoat identity is deeply embedded, it's woven into your sense of self. It's connected to your earliest memories and your deepest fears. You can't just decide one day that you're not going to believe it anymore, but you can start to question it. You can start to notice when it's active. You can start to challenge it gently, the way Jung would challenge it if he were sitting with you. Not with harshness, not with demands that you just get over it, but with curiosity, with compassion, with a willingness to look at it honestly and see it for what it is. What you might start to see is that the scapegoat identity served a purpose once. It helped you make sense of what was happening. When everyone is treating you like you're the problem, believing you're the problem feels better than believing your family is deeply dysfunctional. Because if you're the problem, then maybe you can fix it. Maybe you can earn your way back into belonging. But if the family is the problem, then you're powerless. Then there's nothing you can do. Then you have to face the reality that the people who were supposed to love you and protect you failed you in fundamental ways. And that's unbearable when you're young. So you took on the scapegoat identity as a survival strategy. It was a way of maintaining hope, a way of keeping yourself attached to your family even when that attachment was hurting you, a way of believing that love was possible if you could just figure out how to be different. Jung understood that all of our psychological defenses make sense in context. The scapegoat identity wasn't pathological. It was adaptive. It was the best solution your psyche could come up with given the impossible situation you were in. But now you're not in that situation anymore. You're an adult. You have choices. You have the capacity to see your family more clearly. You have the ability to set boundaries. You have the right to define yourself differently than they defined you. The scapegoat identity that once protected you is now limiting you. It's keeping you small. It's keeping you afraid. It's keeping you from fully inhabiting your life because part of you still believes you don't deserve to. And you do deserve to. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to be seen and known and valued for who you actually are. You deserve relationships where you don't have to earn your place. You deserve to stop apologizing for existing. Jung believed that midlife, that second half of life he talked about so much, is often when the scapegoat starts to wake up. Because you've spent the first half trying to make the family dynamic work, trying to be good enough, trying to prove your worth. And at some point, you get tired. You get tired of trying. You get tired of the performance. You get tired of making yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. You get tired of carrying shame that isn't yours. And in that exhaustion, something begins to crack open. Maybe it's a crisis. Maybe it's a loss. Maybe it's just the accumulation of years of pretending. But something happens that makes you start to question everything. And that questioning, as painful as it is the beginning of freedom. You start to ask yourself questions you've never let yourself ask before. What if they were wrong about me? What if I wasn't the problem? What if my sensitivity wasn't weakness? What if my truth-telling wasn't pathology? What if everything I believed about myself was just their projection? These questions are dangerous to the old identity. They threaten to dismantle everything you've built your sense of self on. And your psyche will resist them at first, because even a painful identity feels safer than no identity at all. But Jung would encourage you to stay with the questions, to let them unsettle you, to be willing to not know for a while, because in the not knowing, in the space between the old identity and whatever comes next, that's where the real you can start to emerge. The self, that deeper sense of who you are, beyond all the conditioning, lives in that space. And it's been waiting for you to get quiet enough, to get tired enough, to get brave enough to listen to it. The self knows you're not the scapegoat. The self knows what happened to you. The self holds your truth, even when you couldn't hold it yourself. And as you start to turn toward the self instead of toward the family's version of you, everything begins to shift. You start to notice things. You start to see patterns you couldn't see before. You start to recognize the ways you've been participating in your own scapegoating, not because you wanted to, but because it was all you knew. You start to see how you volunteer to be the problem in situations where it would be safer to hold others accountable. You start to see how you apologize for things that aren't your fault. You start to see how you make yourself small in relationships so the other person can feel secure. And you start to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Who taught me to do this? And the answer, of course, is that your family taught you. They taught you that your role is to absorb the discomfort so others don't have to feel it. They taught you that your needs come last. They taught you that taking up space is selfish and demanding accountability is aggressive and having boundaries is mean. But those teachings served their needs, not yours. Those teachings kept you in the scapegoat role. Those teachings prevented you from individuating, from becoming your own person with your own authority and your own right to exist as you are. Jung would tell you that unlearning those teachings is essential work. And it's work that often has to happen in relationship. Because the scapegoat wound is a relational wound. It happened in relationship, and it heals in relationship, but it can't heal in relationship with the same people who created it. Not unless they're willing to become conscious, to take back their projections, to see you clearly. And most families aren't capable of that. So healing often happens in new relationships, with therapists who see you, with friends who value you, with partners who don't need you to be the problem, with communities that accept you as you are. These relationships show you that the scapegoat dynamic isn't inevitable, that there are people who can see you without projecting onto you, that there are people who can handle your feelings without making you wrong for having them, that there are people who can tolerate your truth without needing to silence it. And as you experience these different kinds of relationships, the old identity starts to loosen its grip. You start to internalize new messages. You start to believe, slowly and tentatively, that maybe you're not what your family said you were. Maybe you're someone different, someone whole. Jung called this process reparenting yourself. You give yourself what your family couldn't give you. You validate your own experience. You protect yourself. You set boundaries. You choose relationships that honor who you are instead of demanding you be someone else. And you grieve. You grieve the family you needed and didn't have. You grieve the childhood that could have been different. You grieve the version of yourself who spent so many years believing the lie that you were the problem. That grief is holy. Jung understood that grief is how we metabolize loss. It's how we integrate what happened and make space for what's next. The scapegoat who never grieves stays stuck in the role, keeps trying to fix themselves, keeps hoping that one day the family will see them differently. But the scapegoat who grieves gets to move forward, gets to let go of the fantasy of being saved by the people who hurt them, gets to build a life based on reality instead of hope. And reality is this: your family may never change. They may never see what they did. They may never apologize. They may continue to need you to be the problem for the rest of their lives, and you can still be free. Your freedom doesn't depend on them waking up. It depends on you waking up, on you seeing clearly, on you choosing differently. You can grieve what you didn't receive and still build a good life. You can acknowledge the harm and still find peace. You can accept that they're not capable of what you need and still give it to yourself. This is what Jung meant by individuation. Becoming whole despite what you were given. Becoming yourself despite the family's attempts to make you something else. Becoming free despite the weight of the scapegoat role. It's possible. Not easy. Not painless. But possible. And you've already started. The fact that you're here, listening to this, questioning the old story, that's evidence that you're on the path. You're waking up. You're seeing the projection. You're beginning to sort through what's yours and what was placed on you. And every step you take toward consciousness is a step toward freedom. Tonight, as you rest, let yourself feel whatever's here. If it's anger at your family, let it be here. If it's grief for what you lost, let it be here. If it's exhaustion from carrying the scapegoat role for so long, let that be here too. You don't have to resolve any of it tonight. You just have to let yourself feel it. Because feeling it is how you move through it. Feeling it is how the psyche processes and integrates and eventually lets go. Jung trusted the psyche's wisdom. He believed it knows what it needs. And right now, what it needs is for you to stop trying to fix yourself and just let yourself be. Just let yourself feel. Just let yourself rest in the truth of what happened without having to make it mean something about your worth. You're not the problem. You never were. You were the scapegoat, and now you're becoming conscious. Now you're choosing differently. Now you're finding your way back to the self that was always here, whole and untouched by their projection. Rest in that. Let it begin to settle into your body. Let yourself imagine, even just for a moment, what it might feel like to really believe it. You're going to be okay. You're going to be more than okay. You're going to discover who you are when you're not playing the role they assigned you. And that person, the real you, is worth discovering. Let yourself rest now. Let yourself be held by the truth that Jung spent his life trying to help people see. You're not broken. You were scapegoated. And now you're healing. Now you're waking up. Now you're coming home to yourself. Just rest. Just breathe. Just be. There's something else Jung understood about the scapegoat that needs to be said. He understood that being scapegoated gives you gifts. Not because the suffering was good, not because you should be grateful for what happened, but because the psyche transforms everything, even trauma, into potential for growth if we're willing to do the work. The scapegoat develops capacities that others in the family never develop. You learn to read a room in seconds. You learn to sense what people are feeling beneath what they're saying. You learn to see through pretense and performance because your survival depended on knowing what was really happening. These are profound skills. Jung would call them psychological capacities that come from having lived on the margins, from having been the outsider who had to pay attention in ways insiders never do. You developed empathy because you know what it feels like to be misunderstood. You developed compassion because you know what it feels like to be judged unfairly. You developed depth because you couldn't live on the surface the way others could. And you developed the capacity to see the shadow, not just in yourself, but in others, in systems, in families, in culture. You can see what people are projecting. You can sense what's being denied. You can feel the undercurrents that others miss or ignore. This is a gift. It doesn't make the suffering worth it. Nothing makes that kind of suffering worth it. But Jung believed that if we're going to carry a wound, we might as well extract the wisdom from it. We might as well let it become something that serves us, instead of only something that limits us. The scapegoat who becomes conscious, who does the work of seeing the dynamic clearly and separating from it psychologically, that person often becomes a healer. Not necessarily in the professional sense, though sometimes that too, but in the sense that they can hold space for pain in ways others can't. You can sit with someone's shame without needing to fix it or dismiss it or make it about you. You can witness someone's struggle without judgment because you know what it's like to struggle while everyone tells you you're doing it wrong. You can see someone clearly, without projection, because you know how damaging projection is. These capacities make you valuable. They make you someone who can offer others what you didn't receive. And there's a kind of redemption in that. Not redemption of your family. They don't get redeemed by what you became despite them. But redemption of your own suffering. Taking the wound and letting it become wisdom. Jung talked about the wounded healer, the person who has been broken and done the work to heal, and in that process becomes able to help others heal. The scapegoat is often the wounded healer of their generation, or their family, or their community. Not because you set out to be, not because it was your job, but because the wound cracked you open in ways that make you capable of depth and truth and real intimacy. You can't do shallow anymore. You can't do performance. You can't do relationships where everyone pretends. You need real. You need honest. You need people who can handle the fullness of who you are, including the parts that are still healing, still tender, still figuring out how to trust. And those people exist. They're not in your family, maybe. But they exist. And as you continue to wake up, as you continue to differentiate, you'll find them, or they'll find you. Because people recognize each other at the level of their healing. The scapegoat who's done the work recognizes other scapegoats who've done the work. You can see each other. You can witness each other. You can create the kind of belonging that was never available in your family of origin. Jung believed that we can create chosen families, families that aren't based on blood but on shared values, on mutual respect, on the capacity to see each other clearly. For the scapegoat, chosen family often becomes more real and more nourishing than biological family ever was. And that's okay. You're allowed to find your people elsewhere. You're allowed to build a life with people who value what your family devalued. You're allowed to create the sense of belonging that was never available to you as a child. This doesn't make you disloyal. It makes you wise. It makes you someone who's choosing consciousness over obligation. It makes you someone who understands that real family, real love, is based on how people treat you, not on whether you share DNA. Your biological family may always be your biological family, but they don't have to be your primary relationships. They don't have to be the people you go to when you need support or celebration or understanding. You can choose that for yourself now, and choosing differently doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person who's learned that love without respect isn't actually love. That family without safety isn't actually family. That belonging that requires you to betray yourself isn't actually belonging. Jung would say you're making a differentiated choice. You're seeing clearly and acting from that clarity instead of from guilt or obligation or the fantasy that things might change if you just keep trying. Things might change, but probably not. And you can't wait for them to change to start living your life. You can't put your healing on hold while you hope they wake up. You have to move forward whether they come with you or not. And moving forward means making choices that protect your peace. It means setting boundaries that your family will probably call selfish. It means prioritizing your well-being even when it disappoints people who wanted you to keep playing your role. The scapegoat who stops scapegoating themselves often gets called selfish by the family. Because you're no longer absorbing the discomfort. You're no longer making yourself small. You're no longer agreeing to be the problem, and that disrupts the entire system. Jung understood that systems resist change. Your family system was organized around you being the scapegoat. When you refuse that role, when you step out of it, the system destabilizes, and people get uncomfortable. They get angry. They try to pull you back in. They might accuse you of being ungrateful or difficult or acting like you're better than everyone else. They might create crises to re-engage you. They might tell you you're being too sensitive again, that you're overreacting, that you need to let the past go. But what they're really saying is, we need you to go back to being the scapegoat because we don't know how to function without that role being filled. We need you to absorb the shadow again because we don't want to look at it ourselves. And you can say no. You can say, I'm not available for that anymore. You can say, I see what you're doing and I'm not participating. You can say nothing at all and just maintain your boundary. Saying no to the scapegoat role is one of the hardest things you'll ever do, because it feels like you're saying no to your family. It feels like you're choosing yourself over them. And you were taught that choosing yourself is the worst thing you could possibly do. But Jung would tell you that choosing yourself is individuation. It's necessary. It's healthy. It's the only way you get to have a life that's actually yours, instead of a life organized around their needs and their projections. You're not choosing yourself over them. You're choosing reality over fantasy. You're choosing consciousness over unconsciousness. You're choosing to stop participating in a dynamic that harms you. And yes, they might reject you for it. They might pull away. They might talk about you to other family members. They might make you out to be the villain in their story. All of this is possible, but you're already the villain in their story. You've always been the problem in their narrative. You can't change that by continuing to play the role. You can only change your own relationship to their narrative. You can stop believing it. You can stop trying to prove it wrong. You can stop needing them to see you differently. And when you stop needing that, when you accept that they might never see you clearly, something shifts. You become free. Not free of the pain. The pain of not being seen by your family is real, and it matters. But free of the need to keep trying. Free of the hope that's been keeping you stuck. Free of the fantasy that you can earn your way into their love and acceptance. Jung called this acceptance, not acceptance of the harm, not agreement with what they did, but acceptance of reality. Acceptance that this is who they are. Acceptance that this is what happened. Acceptance that you can't change them or the past, but you can change how you relate to both. Acceptance is where your power lives. Because as long as you're fighting reality, as long as you're wishing things were different, you're giving your power away. You're staying oriented toward them, toward their approval, toward the hope that one day they'll see. But when you accept that they probably won't, when you grieve that and let it be true, you get your power back. You get to orient toward yourself, toward your own healing, toward building a life that works for you, instead of a life organized around earning their approval. And this is where the real transformation happens. This is where you stop being the scapegoat and start being yourself. This is where the wound becomes wisdom and the survival strategy becomes a choice. You can choose now. You can choose how much contact to have. You can choose what you share and what you keep private. You can choose to show up at family events or not. You can choose to maintain relationships with some family members and not others. All of this is yours to choose. And whatever you choose is okay as long as it's based on what's actually good for you, not on guilt or obligation or the belief that you owe them something. Jung would say you don't owe them your continued participation in your own harm. You don't owe them access to your life. You don't owe them forgiveness if forgiveness doesn't feel true. You don't owe them reconciliation if reconciliation requires you to pretend the harm didn't happen. You owe yourself honesty. You owe yourself protection. You owe yourself the chance to discover who you are when you're not performing the scapegoat role. And discovering that takes time. It takes space. It takes distance from the people who needed you to be someone you're not. You can't become yourself while you're still trying to manage their feelings or meet their expectations or convince them you're not the problem. You have to step away, at least psychologically, if not physically, and let yourself breathe. Let yourself feel without their voices in your head telling you your feelings are wrong. Let yourself want without their judgment telling you your wants are selfish. Let yourself exist without their constant evaluation of whether you're doing it right. This space, this distance, is where you find yourself. Jung called it the withdrawal of projections. You take back your psychic energy from the family system. You stop participating in their drama. You stop trying to change their minds. You stop offering yourself up as the problem to be solved. And in that withdrawal, in that reclaiming of your energy, you discover capacities you didn't know you had. You discover that you're stronger than you thought, that you're more resilient than they led you to believe, that you can trust yourself in ways you never learned to trust yourself when you were young. You discover your own authority, your own sense of what's true and right for you, your own ability to navigate your life without needing their approval or validation or permission. This is what Jung meant by the development of the self. The self is your inner authority. It's the part of you that knows what you need even when others tell you you're wrong. It's the part of you that can hold your truth even when no one else believes it. It's the part of you that's whole and always has been, even when everyone treated you like you were broken. The scapegoat's journey is a journey back to the self, back to the wholeness that was always there, but got buried under layers of projection and shame, and the need to survive in a family that couldn't see you. And the way back is through feeling. Through letting yourself feel all the feelings you had to suppress when you were young. The anger at being treated unfairly. The grief at not being loved well. The rage at being made the problem when you weren't. The sadness of growing up without the protection and validation you deserved. All of these feelings are valid. All of them need space. All of them are part of your healing. And you can feel them now. You're safe enough now. You're far enough away now. You're strong enough now. Jung believed that unfelt feelings stay in the psyche, causing symptoms and patterns and repetitions until they're finally allowed to be felt and released. The scapegoat often carries decades of unfelt feelings. Feelings you weren't allowed to have. Feelings that would have been used as evidence of your dysfunction. Feelings you had to swallow to keep the peace. But you don't have to swallow them anymore. You can let them come up. You can let them move through you. You can feel the full weight of what you carried, and then, when it's time, you can let it go. Not all at once. Healing doesn't work that way, but gradually, piece by piece, feeling by feeling, memory by memory, you let yourself revisit what happened with adult eyes and adult understanding. You let yourself see clearly what you couldn't see as a child. You let yourself name the harm that you had to minimize in order to survive. And as you do this work, as you let yourself see and feel and name the truth, something remarkable happens. The scapegoat identity begins to lose its power. It stops feeling like who you are and starts feeling like what was done to you. You weren't born a scapegoat. You became one because your family needed you to be one. And now you're becoming something else. You're becoming conscious. You're becoming differentiated. You're becoming free. This transformation is sacred. Jung would say it's a kind of death and rebirth. The death of the false self, the scapegoat self, the self that was organized around their needs, and the rebirth of the true self, the self that was always there, waiting to be discovered. And in this rebirth, you get to choose. You get to choose what you keep from your family and what you leave behind. You get to choose which values feel true and which were just imposed. You get to choose what kind of person you want to be now that you're not trying to earn their love. Maybe you want to be someone who sets boundaries easily. Maybe you want to be someone who trusts their own perceptions. Maybe you want to be someone who doesn't apologize for existing. Maybe you want to be someone who can receive love without waiting for the rejection that must be coming. All of this is possible. All of this is part of the healing. All of this is available to you now that you're waking up from the scapegoat story. Jung would remind you that this work takes courage. It takes more courage to face your family honestly than it does to keep pretending. It takes more courage to choose yourself than it does to keep sacrificing yourself for their comfort. It takes more courage to grieve what you didn't receive than it does to keep hoping things will change. But you have that courage. You've always had it. The fact that you survived being the scapegoat proves it. The fact that you're still here, still trying to understand, still willing to do this work, that's evidence of profound strength. You're not weak. You were never weak. You were sensitive. Yes. You were aware. Yes. You were honest in a system built on lies. Yes. But none of that is weakness. All of that is strength. The family called it weakness because your strength threatened them. Your honesty revealed their denial. Your sensitivity showed up their numbness. Your inability to pretend exposed their performance. So they had to diminish you. They had to make your strengths into flaws. They had to convince you that what made you powerful actually made you broken. But Jung would help you see through that. He would help you reclaim your sensitivity as a gift, your honesty as integrity, your awareness as wisdom, your emotional capacity as depth. These qualities make you who you are. And who you are is not the scapegoat. Who you are is someone who was scapegoated and is now healing. Someone who was hurt and is now becoming whole. Someone who was silenced and is now finding their voice. That voice matters. What you have to say matters. Your truth matters. Your experience matters. And you don't need your family to validate that for it to be true. It's already true. It's always been true. You just needed permission to believe it. And if you can't get that permission from them, you can give it to yourself. Consider this your permission. You're allowed to see your family clearly. You're allowed to name what happened. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to grieve. You're allowed to set boundaries. You're allowed to choose differently. You're allowed to stop being the scapegoat and start being yourself. Tonight, as you rest, let yourself feel the weight of that permission. Let yourself imagine what it might be like to really claim it, to really live from it, to really believe that you're allowed to exist as you are without having to earn that right. You've been earning your right to exist for so long. You've been trying to prove you're good enough for so long. You've been performing for so long. You can stop now. You can rest. You can let yourself just be here without trying to fix anything or prove anything or become anything other than what you already are. You're already enough. You were always enough. The scapegoat story said otherwise, but the scapegoat story was a lie. Jung knew it was a lie, and now you're beginning to know it too. Let that knowing settle in. Let it become more real than the old story. Let it become the ground you stand on as you continue this journey toward freedom. You're doing it. You're healing. You're waking up. And that's everything. Just rest now. Just breathe. Just be. The work will continue tomorrow. But tonight, you can rest in the truth that Jung spent his life trying to help people see. You're not the scapegoat. You never were. You were the truth teller, and now you're telling the truth to yourself. That's where freedom begins. There's a question that the scapegoat asks themselves over and over, a question that keeps them stuck, keeps them hoping, keeps them trying. The question is, what if I'm wrong? What if they were right about me? What if I really am the problem? And Jung would understand why you ask this question. He would understand that when everyone around you is telling you the same story about who you are, it becomes almost impossible not to internalize it. When your mother, your father, your siblings, maybe even extended family, all seem to agree that you're difficult or too sensitive or the source of the family's problems, how can you trust your own perception? But here's what Jung would tell you. The fact that multiple people agree doesn't make something true. Especially in families, especially in unconscious systems where everyone is participating in the same denial, the same projection, the same need to avoid looking at the real problems. Families can have collective delusions. They can all agree on a story that isn't true because that story serves the system. And in scapegoating families, the story is that one person is the problem. Everyone agrees because everyone needs it to be true. Because if it's not true, then the whole family has to face its dysfunction. So they all participate in making you the problem. And their agreement with each other becomes evidence to you that you must really be the problem. But Jung would say this is gaslighting at a systemic level. It's reality distortion. It's the family's shared unconscious, protecting itself by making you doubt your own truth. And you did doubt it. Of course you did. How could you not? When you're young, you need your family to survive. You need to believe they see you clearly. You need to trust that they have your best interests at heart. So when they tell you who you are, you believe them, even when it hurts, even when it doesn't feel true, even when everything in you is screaming that something is wrong. You believe them because not believing them means facing something too terrifying. It means facing the reality that your family is unsafe, that your family is dysfunctional, that your family is harming you. Children can't afford to know that. So they make themselves the problem instead. They internalize the scapegoat role. They learn to doubt themselves. They learn to trust the family's version of reality over their own experience. And now, years later, you're still doing it. You're still asking yourself, what if they were right? You're still doubting your own perceptions. You're still wondering if maybe you really are too sensitive, too difficult, too much. But Jung would help you see that this doubt is a symptom of the trauma, not evidence of truth. The doubt is what happens when you've been gaslit for so long that you can't trust yourself anymore. The doubt is the internalized voice of the family, still questioning your right to your own reality. And one of the most important parts of healing is learning to trust yourself again, learning to believe your own experience, learning to know that what you felt was real even if no one else validated it. This is hard work, because trusting yourself after being scapegoated feels dangerous. What if you trust yourself and you're wrong? What if you trust yourself and they really were right? What if you trust yourself and you end up alone? These fears are real, but Jung would tell you that the risk of trusting yourself is worth it. Because not trusting yourself means continuing to live in their version of reality. It means continuing to doubt your perceptions, to question your feelings, to wonder if you're making things up or being too sensitive or overreacting. And that's no way to live. That's a prison. That's the continuation of the scapegoat dynamic inside your own mind. So, how do you learn to trust yourself again? Jung would say it starts with paying attention to your body. Your body knows the truth even when your mind is confused. Your body knows when something feels safe and when it doesn't. Your body knows when someone is being honest with you and when they're not. Your body knows when you need to set a boundary and when it's okay to let someone in. The scapegoat often learns to override their body's signals. You learn to ignore your gut feelings because acting on them would have gotten you in trouble. You learn to suppress your instincts because your instincts were telling you things the family couldn't afford to acknowledge. But your body was right. Your instincts were right. And learning to listen to them again is part of how you reclaim your trust in yourself. When something feels off, it probably is off. When someone's words don't match their energy, your body knows it. When you're in a situation that reminds you of the family dynamic, your nervous system will tell you before your mind catches up. Jung believed that the body holds wisdom the conscious mind doesn't have access to. The body remembers what happened even when we try to forget. The body carries the truth even when we've been trained to doubt it. So start there. Start with noticing what your body is telling you. When you're around your family, what do you feel? Tension? Anxiety? The urge to make yourself small? The need to be hypervigilant about everyone's moods? The exhaustion of managing everyone's feelings? Those sensations are information. They're telling you that you're in an environment that isn't safe for your authentic self. They're telling you that the scapegoat dynamic is still active, They're telling you that you need protection, and you can give yourself that protection now. You can listen to your body. You can set boundaries. You can leave situations that don't feel good. You can trust your instincts even when the family tells you you're being too sensitive, because you're not too sensitive. Sensitivity is your gift. It's what allowed you to survive in that environment. It's what allows you to see clearly now. It's what makes you capable of deep connection and genuine intimacy. The family called it too sensitive because your sensitivity threatened their denial. But in the real world, in healthy relationships, sensitivity is valued. Emotional awareness is valued. The capacity to feel deeply is valued. You just have to find your people. The people who appreciate what the family devalued. The people who don't need you to be less so they can feel like more. The people who can handle your truth without making you the problem. And as you find those people, as you experience relationships where you don't have to perform or manage or make yourself small, something begins to heal. You begin to trust that maybe you're not the problem. Maybe you never were. Maybe you just needed to be in a different environment with different people. Jung would say this is evidence. Real evidence. Not the family's distorted version of reality, but actual data from your life. When you're with certain people, you flourish. You feel like yourself. You don't have to constantly monitor yourself or apologize for existing. You can just be. That's not because those people are better at tolerating your dysfunction. It's because those people aren't projecting onto you. They're seeing you clearly. And when you're seen clearly, you can relax. You can be authentic. You can trust. This is what you deserved from your family. This is what Jung would say every child deserves. To be seen clearly. To be accepted as they are. To be allowed to develop into who they're meant to be, instead of having to conform to who the family needs them to be. You didn't get that, and that's not your fault. That's not evidence of your inadequacy. That's evidence of your family's limitations. But you can give it to yourself now. You can see yourself clearly. You can accept yourself as you are. You can allow yourself to keep developing, keep growing, keep becoming who you're meant to be. And part of that becoming is letting go of the scapegoat identity. Not just intellectually, but deep in your psyche. Letting go of the belief that you're fundamentally flawed. Letting go of the hypervigilance that says you always have to be monitoring yourself for mistakes. Letting go of the shame that says you're too much or not enough. Jung would say this letting go happens in layers. You don't just decide one day that you're healed and it's over. You peel back one layer and find another underneath. You heal one aspect and discover there's more work to do. You think you finally let it go, and then something triggers the old pattern and you're right back in it. This is normal. This is how healing works. The scapegoat wound is deep. It's been with you for most of your life. It's shaped how you see yourself and how you relate to others. It's not going to disappear overnight. But each time you notice it, each time you catch yourself in the old pattern and choose differently, you're weakening its grip. You're building new neural pathways. You're teaching your psyche that there's another way to be. And gradually, over time, the scapegoat identity loses its power. It stops feeling like who you are and starts feeling like something that happened to you. It becomes part of your history instead of the core of your identity. This shift is profound. It's the difference between being a scapegoat and being someone who was scapegoated. The first is an identity. The second is an experience. And Jung would say that moving from identity to experience is the heart of healing. You're not the scapegoat. You had the experience of being scapegoated. And now you're integrating that experience. You're learning from it. You're extracting the wisdom without staying stuck in the wound. This is what Jung meant by transformation. taking what happened and allowing it to change you in ways that serve your growth instead of ways that keep you small. Taking the scapegoat experience and letting it become depth, compassion, awareness, strength. But this transformation requires something difficult. It requires forgiveness. Not forgiveness of your family necessarily. That may or may not come, and it doesn't have to. But forgiveness of yourself. You have to forgive yourself for believing what they said about you. You have to forgive yourself for the years you spent trying to fix yourself. You have to forgive yourself for the times you participated in your own scapegoating. For the times you made yourself small. For the times you abandoned yourself trying to gain their approval. You were doing the best you could with what you knew. You were surviving. You were a child and then a young person trying to make sense of an impossible situation. You can't blame yourself for the strategies you used to get through it. Jung would tell you that self-compassion is essential. You can't heal in an environment of self-judgment. You can't become whole while you're still criticizing yourself for not healing faster or better or more completely. Healing happens at its own pace. The psyche knows what it's doing. And your job is not to force it or control it, but to create the conditions where it can happen. Conditions of safety, conditions of compassion, conditions of truth. And truth means acknowledging all of it. The harm your family did, the ways you internalized that harm, the times you've repeated the pattern in your own life, the relationships where you've accepted less than you deserve because you didn't believe you deserved more. The ways you've made yourself small because being big felt too dangerous. All of it needs to be seen. All of it needs to be acknowledged. Not with shame, not with judgment, but with honesty and compassion and a commitment to doing it differently going forward. Because you can do it differently. You can choose relationships where you don't have to be the scapegoat. You can set boundaries that protect your well-being. You can trust your own perceptions. You can stop trying to convince people who are determined to misunderstand you. You can choose yourself, over and over, every day, every moment, every time the old pattern tries to activate. And some days that will feel impossible. Some days the pullback into the scapegoat role will be so strong you won't be able to resist it. Some days you'll find yourself right back in the old dynamic, absorbing everyone's discomfort, making yourself the problem, trying to fix things that aren't yours to fix. And that's okay. That doesn't mean you're not healing. It means you're human. It means the pattern is deeply ingrained and it takes time to change. It means you're still learning. Jung would remind you to be patient with yourself, to have compassion for how hard this work is, to celebrate the small victories instead of focusing on the setbacks. Every time you notice the pattern, that's a victory. Every time you set a boundary, that's a victory. Every time you choose not to engage with someone's projection, that's a victory. Every time you validate your own experience instead of doubting it, that's a victory. These small victories add up. They accumulate. They create momentum. And over time, they lead to real change, to real freedom, to a life that actually feels like yours, instead of a life organized around avoiding rejection or earning approval. And in that life, in that freedom, you get to discover things about yourself you never knew. You get to find out what you actually like instead of what you thought you should like. You get to explore interests that the family might have dismissed or criticized. You get to build a life that reflects your values instead of theirs. You get to become yourself, fully, authentically, without apology. This is what Jung meant by individuation, becoming a whole person, becoming differentiated from the family, becoming someone who knows who they are and can stand in that knowing even when others don't understand it or approve of it. It's what you've been working toward all along, even when you didn't know that's what you were doing. Every time you questioned the family story, Every time you felt that something was wrong, even when everyone said it was fine. Every time you chose truth over conformity. You've been individuating. You've been becoming yourself. And now you're at a place where you can do it consciously, deliberately, with full awareness of what you're choosing and why. You're choosing freedom over belonging to people who only accept you when you're playing a role. You're choosing truth over the comfort of denial. You're choosing yourself over the fantasy that your family will one day see you clearly. These are brave choices. These are hard choices. These are choices that Jung would honor, because he understood how much courage it takes to stand in your own truth when everyone around you is invested in a different story. But you have that courage. You've always had it. It's been there all along, beneath the doubt and the shame and the fear. It's been there waiting for you to claim it. And tonight, as you rest, let yourself feel that courage. Let yourself acknowledge how far you've come. Let yourself recognize that you're not the same person who accepted the scapegoat role without question. You're someone who's waking up, someone who's seeing clearly, someone who's choosing differently. You're healing. It's slow and it's hard and it's not linear, but it's happening. Every day, every moment, every choice you make to trust yourself instead of doubting yourself. The scapegoat wound is transforming. It's becoming wisdom. It's becoming strength. It's becoming the foundation for a life that's truly yours. Jung would see that. He would recognize the profound psychological work you're doing. He would honor the difficulty of it and the courage it requires. And he would tell you what I'm telling you now. You're going to be okay. You're going to be more than okay. You're going to discover that on the other side of this grief and this work and this letting go, there's a version of you that's free. Not perfect. Not without scars. But free. Free to be who you actually are. Free to trust yourself. Free to build a life that reflects your truth instead of their projections. That freedom is worth fighting for. It's worth grieving for. It's worth the discomfort of setting boundaries and the loneliness of sometimes standing alone and the fear of not knowing who you are without the scapegoat identity. Because who you are without that identity is worth discovering. Who you actually are, beneath all the conditioning and the projection and the shame, is beautiful, is valuable, is enough. Jung believed this about every person he worked with. That beneath the wounds and the defenses and the adaptations, there's a self that's whole and always has been. Your self is there. It's been waiting, and it's time to let yourself come home to it. Just rest now. Just breathe. Just let yourself be here without trying to be anything, or prove anything, or fix anything. You've been carrying so much for so long. You can put it down now. You can rest. You can trust that the healing is happening even when you can't see it. The work continues. But tonight, you rest. You're not the scapegoat. You never were. You were the one who saw the truth. And now you're living it. That's everything. Just rest. Just breathe. Just be. As you lie here tonight, I want you to know something that Jung spent his entire life trying to help people understand. The scapegoat doesn't just survive. The scapegoat, when they do the work, when they face the truth and integrate the wound, the scapegoat transforms into something remarkable. You transform into someone who can hold complexity, someone who understands that people can love you and harm you at the same time. That families can be both the source of your deepest wounds and the place you learned about connection. That your parents probably did the best they could with what they had, and that their best still wasn't enough. This kind of complexity is rare. Most people can't hold it. They need things to be simple. They need people to be all good or all bad. They need clear villains and clear victims. But you've learned that life is more complicated than that. Your family wasn't all bad. There were probably moments of real love, real connection, real care. And there was also real harm, real dysfunction. real scapegoating. Both things can be true at the same time. Jung would say this capacity to hold paradox, to tolerate ambiguity, to live in the tension of opposites, this is a sign of psychological maturity. It's something the scapegoat often develops because you had to. You had to make sense of loving people who hurt you. You had to find a way to survive in a system that needed you to be the problem. And in doing that, in learning to hold that complexity, you developed a kind of wisdom that people who had easier childhoods often never develop. You understand nuance. You understand that people are complicated. You understand that good intentions don't erase harmful impact. This wisdom makes you valuable. It makes you someone who can see situations clearly without getting lost in black and white thinking. It makes you someone who can hold space for others' complexity because you've learned to hold your own. And this is part of the gift, part of what Jung would say you extracted from the wound. The scapegoat who heals becomes someone with profound psychological depth. Someone who can navigate complexity with grace. Someone who knows that healing doesn't mean everything gets resolved neatly. It means you learn to live with the unresolved parts with more peace. And peace is what you're moving toward now. Not the peace of pretending everything is fine. Not the peace of denial or avoidance or minimization. But the peace of acceptance, the peace of knowing the truth and being okay with it, the peace of releasing the need for your family to change or acknowledge what happened or become different than they are. This peace comes from surrendering the fight, surrendering the hope that kept you stuck, surrendering the fantasy that one day they'll see you clearly and everything will be okay. They might never see you clearly. And everything can still be okay. Because your okayness doesn't depend on them anymore. It depends on you. On your willingness to see yourself clearly. On your commitment to treating yourself with the compassion they couldn't offer. On your choice to build a life that honors who you actually are. Jung believed that this surrender, this acceptance, is where real freedom lives. Not in getting what you wanted from your family, but in releasing the need to get it. In recognizing that you can grieve what you didn't receive and still move forward. You can acknowledge the harm and still find joy. You can carry the scapegoat wound and still live a full, meaningful, connected life. The wound doesn't have to define you. It's part of your story, but it's not the whole story. And the more you heal, the more you integrate, the more the wound becomes just one thread in a much larger tapestry. A tapestry that includes your strength and your resilience and your capacity for depth. A tapestry that includes the relationships you've built with people who see you clearly. A tapestry that includes the ways you've learned to trust yourself and set boundaries and choose your own well-being. All of this is part of who you are now. The scapegoat wound is there, yes. But so is everything you've become because of how you've responded to it. The wisdom you've gained. The compassion you've developed. The fierce commitment to truth and authenticity that the experience gave you. Jung would say you're integrating. You're taking all the disparate parts of your experience and weaving them into a coherent whole. You're making peace with your story. You're accepting that this is what happened and this is who you are because of it, and both the wound and the healing are part of your journey. And the journey continues. Healing isn't a destination. It's not something you arrive at one day and then you're done. It's an ongoing process, an ongoing choice, an ongoing commitment to consciousness and truth and self-compassion. Some days will be harder than others. Some days the scapegoat wound will feel as fresh as it did when you were young. Some days you'll be triggered by something small, and suddenly you're right back in the family dynamic. Feeling all the old feelings, believing all the old beliefs about yourself. And that's okay. That doesn't mean you're not healing. It means you're human. It means some wounds run so deep they never fully close. They become scars. And scars are sensitive. They ache sometimes. They remind you of what happened. But scars are also evidence of healing. Evidence that your body, your psyche, has been working to repair itself. Evidence that, even though the wound was deep, you survived it. You're still here. You're still growing. You're still becoming. Jung would honor the scar. He wouldn't try to make it disappear or minimize it or tell you it shouldn't still hurt sometimes. He would acknowledge that some wounds leave marks, and that's okay. The marks are part of your story. They're evidence of what you survived. They're reminders of your strength. And you are strong. Stronger than you know. The fact that you made it through a childhood where you were scapegoated, where you were made the problem, where you were denied the basic validation and protection every child deserves. The fact that you made it through that and you're still here, still trying to heal, still willing to look at it honestly. That takes profound strength. Don't ever let anyone tell you you're weak. Don't ever let yourself believe it. The scapegoat who survives and then does the work to heal is one of the strongest people Jung ever encountered. Because you didn't just survive, you're transforming the experience. You're using it to become more conscious, more compassionate, more whole. That's not weakness. That's extraordinary courage. And tonight, as you let yourself rest, I want you to acknowledge that courage. I want you to recognize how far you've come. From the child who believed they were the problem to the adult who can see the projection clearly. From the person who doubted their own reality to the person who's learning to trust themselves. From someone stuck in the scapegoat role to someone who's choosing freedom. This journey you're on is sacred. It's difficult and painful and often lonely. But it's sacred because you're reclaiming yourself. You're taking back your right to define who you are. You're refusing to let your family's projections be the final word on your identity. Jung would say this is the work of a lifetime. Individuation doesn't happen quickly. It happens slowly, through thousands of small choices to trust yourself instead of doubting yourself. To honor your truth instead of suppressing it. To choose relationships that reflect your worth instead of relationships that confirm your worst fears about yourself. And each choice matters. Each choice builds on the one before it. Each choice creates momentum toward the life you're meant to live. The life where you're not the scapegoat, where you're not the problem, where you're just yourself, in all your complexity and depth and beauty. Where you're allowed to take up space and have needs and set boundaries and be imperfect without being rejected. That life is possible. You're building it. Piece by piece. Day by day. Choice by choice. And some days you'll doubt it. Some days you'll wonder if it's worth it. Some days you'll be so tired of the work and the grief and the loneliness of standing in your truth that you'll want to give up. You'll want to go back to the old role because at least it was familiar. At least you knew what to expect. But you can't go back. Even if you tried, it wouldn't work. Because you've seen too much now. You've understood too much. You've tasted freedom, and you can't unknow what it feels like. So you keep going, not because it's easy, but because the alternative is living a half-life. The alternative is betraying yourself to maintain relationships that only work if you stay small. The alternative is spending the rest of your life trying to earn love from people who aren't capable of seeing you clearly. And you deserve more than that. You've always deserved more than that. Even when you couldn't see it. Even when no one else could see it. The truth of your worth was always there, waiting for you to recognize it. Jung believed that every person has inherent worth. Not worth that has to be earned or proven, but worth that exists simply because you exist. The self, in Jung's understanding, is whole and complete and valuable exactly as it is. Your family couldn't see that. They projected their shadow onto you and made you carry it. They needed you to be the problem, so they didn't have to face their own issues. And in doing that, they obscured your inherent worth. They made you believe you had to earn your right to be loved and accepted. But that was never true. You didn't have to earn it. You were always worthy. You were always enough. The scapegoat story said otherwise, but the scapegoat story was their story, not yours. Your story is different. Your story is about a person who was harmed and is healing. A person who was gaslit and is learning to trust themselves again. A person who was made small and is choosing to become full-sized. A person who was told they were the problem and is discovering they never were. This is your story, and you get to write the next chapters. You get to decide what comes next. You get to choose whether you continue to give your family power over your sense of self or whether you take that power back. Taking it back doesn't mean you cut everyone off. Though sometimes that's necessary, it doesn't mean you never see them again or never speak to them. It means you stop needing them to validate your reality. You stop waiting for them to see you clearly. You stop organizing your life around earning their approval. You validate yourself. You see yourself clearly. You approve of yourself. And you let them be who they are without needing them to be different. This is acceptance in its truest form, not agreement with what they did, not minimization of the harm, but acceptance that this is who they are, and this is what happened, and you can't change it. What you can change is how you relate to it. How much space you give it in your life. How much power you give their voices in your head. How much of your energy you spend trying to make them understand something they're not capable of understanding. Jung would say all of that energy needs to come back to you. It needs to be redirected toward your own healing, your own growth, your own becoming, because that's where your power is, not in changing them, but in becoming more fully yourself. And as you become more fully yourself, as you integrate the scapegoat wound and transform it into wisdom, something remarkable happens. You stop being so affected by them. Their opinions stop carrying so much weight. Their projections stop landing as deeply. Their attempts to pull you back into the scapegoat role stop working. Not because you've become cold or detached or uncaring, but because you've developed a strong enough sense of self that you don't need their validation to know who you are. You know who you are, and that knowing is more real, more solid, more trustworthy than anything they could tell you. This is the fruit of the work you've been doing. This is what happens when you commit to consciousness and truth and self-compassion over time. You become unshakable in your own knowing. You become clear about your worth. You become free of the need for them to see you clearly because you see yourself clearly. And in that freedom, in that clarity, you discover something beautiful. You discover that you can have compassion for them without losing yourself. You can see their limitations without taking responsibility for their growth. You can wish them well without needing to be in close relationship with them. This is what Jung called differentiation with love. You're separate from them. You're your own person with your own life and your own truth. And you can still hold love for them, even from a distance, even with boundaries, even while acknowledging the harm they did. Not everyone gets here. Some scapegoats stay angry forever. Some stay stuck in the hope that things will change. Some never fully separate and spend their whole lives trying to make the family dynamic work. But you're not staying stuck. You're moving forward. You're choosing healing even when it's hard. You're choosing truth even when it's lonely. You're choosing yourself even when it disappoints people who wanted you to keep playing your role. And that choice, repeated over time, leads to transformation, leads to freedom, leads to a life that's truly yours. Tonight, as you drift deeper into rest, Let yourself feel the weight of what you've been carrying. The scapegoat role, the family shadow, the belief that something was wrong with you. Let yourself feel how heavy it's been, how exhausting, how painful, and then, gently, begin to let it go. Not all at once, not forever, but for tonight, for this moment. You can put it down. You can rest without it. You can just be here, in the darkness, in the quiet, without trying to fix yourself or prove yourself or become someone you're not. You can just be, just breathe, just rest. The work will be there tomorrow. The healing will continue. But tonight, you get to rest in the truth that Jung spent his life helping people see. You're not the scapegoat. You never were. You were the one who could see the truth in a family that couldn't face it. You were the one who felt what everyone else was denying. You were the one who carried the shadow so others didn't have to look at it. But you don't have to carry it anymore. You can give it back. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but internally, psychologically, spiritually. This is their shadow, not yours. This is their projection, not your truth. This is their inability to face themselves, not your failure to be acceptable. Let it go. Let yourself rest in the knowing that you're whole. You've always been whole. The scapegoat wound tried to convince you otherwise, but it was lying. You're enough. You're valuable. You're worthy of love and belonging and respect. Not because you earned it, but because you exist. Because you're a human being with inherent worth. Because the self, your true nature, is whole and always has been. Jung knew this about you. Even though he never met you, even though he's been gone for decades, he knew this about every person who was scapegoated. He knew the truth beneath the projection. He knew the wholeness beneath the wound. And now you're beginning to know it too. Beginning to see yourself the way Jung would see you. Not as broken or too much or fundamentally flawed, but as someone who survived something difficult and is now transforming it into wisdom. You're doing it. You're healing. You're becoming. And that's everything. Just rest now. Let yourself sink into the softness of the bed. Let your body relax. Let your mind quiet. Let yourself be held by the darkness, by the silence, by the knowledge that you're exactly where you need to be. The scapegoat wound is healing. The internalized voices are getting quieter. The doubt is loosening its grip. And you're emerging. The real you. The self that was always there. Whole and beautiful and enough. Let yourself rest in that truth tonight. Let it settle into your bones. Let it become more real than the old story ever was. You're free. You're becoming free. And freedom is your birthright. Jung understood. And now you understand too. Just rest. Just breathe. Just let yourself be. You've done enough. You are enough. You've always been enough. Let that be the last thought as you drift into sleep. The last knowing as consciousness fades. You're enough. You're whole. You're free. Just rest now. Just sleep. Just be. Everything else can wait. Tonight, you rest in the truth. You're not the scapegoat. You never were. You were always whole. And now you're remembering. Sleep well. Sleep deep. Sleep free. You're home now. You're home. If this resonated with you, if you found comfort here tonight, you might share your experience in the comments below. Not for me. For others who need to know they're not alone in this. And if you'd like more meditations on depth psychology, on Jung's wisdom, on the journey home to yourself, consider subscribing Jung at Night. Weekly meditations to help you heal, to help you see clearly, to help you become who you were always meant to be. But for now, just rest. Just sleep. Just be. You're exactly where you need to be. Sleep well.